Hello, I'm Mark, and welcome to my channel. In this Unreal Engine tutorials video, we will be doing a small primer covering the basics of network replication within Unreal Engine. So for this video, I'm going to be doing something a little different, in which I will be starting off with blueprints first, how you can do network replication there. I know that there's a lot of videos out there already that do a pretty good job of it, but what I would like to do is I'd like to start off with blueprints and kind of cover the basics of network replication and strategy there, and then we'll move over to C++, where we can then show you how you can then take what you can do in blueprints and how you can do that in C++. And then from there, we'll then be able to do some comparing, contrasting, as well as kind of taking a look at some of the things that might be a little bit different and some of the additional things you can probably get away with within C++ that you can't necessarily do very easily within blueprints. So, as always, we have a lot of ground to cover today, so let's get started. Okay, so for starters, I'm going to be doing this in Unreal Engine 5.7, and for this tutorial, I'm going to be using the third person. So under New Projects, it'll pop up the wizard. We're going to come to Games, Third Person, and we're going to want C++ since we are going to be doing C++. How to do network replication with C++. So we'll want the C++ version of the project. Give it a name, hit Create. And once all that is done, we should get a solution that kind of looks like this. So once we have this, there's a couple of things I want to do for this demo. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to Content Drawer. I'm going to create a new folder called New Folder. And we'll call this... just going to call it Replication. And in here, I'm just going to create a little blueprint which I'm going to use so that I can spawn it, and it's just going to be an actor. So it's just going to be a BP cube. Gonna open that up, and I'll just bring this over to this side, and I'm just going to say add cube. Grab it, and I'm just going to move this over to the default scene component, and we'll give it another different color. That one. Let's see. Why not? Let's just use that one. All right, I'm going to hit compile and hit save, and that's all we're going to do here. We don't need to do anything. So close that, and then we'll come back to the content drawer, and let's go to third person. So I'm going to be doing, for the blueprint part of this, I'm going to do it in, just going to put it straight into this third person blueprint. We don't need to worry about any of this touch screen stuff, so I'll just move it off to the side. And so let's get started. So when it comes to replication, what we're going to be doing is within these within your classes, you're going to be replicating, for the most part, you'll be replicating variables. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create our variable, and we'll call this I'm going to make this a replicated float, and I'm going to just set this to float. So once we've got a variable over here and compiled, we'll under the details on the left side, we've got some options here. We have replication, and then we have replication condition. So once we turn replication, and under replication, we actually have two options. We have replicated and rep notify. So replicated is a replicated variable that we can use, which is usually used when you're replicating variables that are going to be consumed by a tick event. So if you've got variables that need to drive character motion, or character stats, character motions, things that are going to be part of a simulation, then your best bet is going to be using the replicated variable. But we also have replication notify. So if I go ahead and create a new variable, I'm going to call and I'm going to call this replication state float for this demo, and it's still going to be a float. If we come back under replication and we go to rep notify, as you can see here, it's also created us a function. So this is replication notify is for anything where you need an event triggered. So you're replicating a value across the network from the client to the server and back out to all the clients, and as part of that, you want to trigger an event. So this is the best way to do it, rather than using just replicated. And then also under here, you've got this replication condition, and we'll get to this a little bit later, but this can be very useful if you need to do some kind of tweaks, or you're trying to do some network optimization, right? You may not need to replicate something. You might want to replicate to the server, but you don't necessarily need it to replicate out to all of the other clients. This could be just internal information about your character. But then you could also have things that do replicate out to the clients, but don't necessarily need to replicate out to yourself. So if it's owner only, it will replicate out to the server and back to you. Won't be shared with the clients. If it's skip owner, then you can replicate out to all the clients, but it won't get replicated out to you or back to you. And this could be good for things which aren't really going to change. But you need to make sure that they change on the client. So again, this can be used for some optimization. Simulated only, autonomous only. It's very similar to skip owner versus owner only. Simulated or physics. So there's a lot of things in here you can kind of play with when it comes to replication and how you want a variable to get replicated out. And it works for both notify and for regular. All right, so now that we've got our variables, we've set them up to replication. Now we need to get them to replicate. So once you do that, if you drag it off and say get replicated variable, you notice that replication is turned on when you see these two little white spheres. That's kind of an indicator in the browser that this variable is now able to is flagged for replication by Unreal Engine. So once we have this, we want to be able to, so we're going to try and replicate this variable across the network. So to do that, we can get a tick event. So if you don't have a tick event in your character blueprint, just go in there, right click, type tick event, and you've got it. So, and I want to output this tick event. So I'm going to say, go to a print text, and I'm just going to drag that off and say format. So there's my format text, and in here we're going to say F. So you can type your text in, and then anything you want, any valuables or variables, I should say, that are coming in, just put in a curly brace, and within the curly, you just type up it can be a letter, it can be a word, and that representation comes down into the node down here, and that's what we're going to park in. So there's our replicated variable, and we're going to print it out for our character when it gets created. And then we want to change this value. So to do that, we're going to say I'm going to put it on debug key 1 for now. So here we have a debug key 1, and I'm just going to drag this, and I'm going to say set, and we're going to say, and I'm going to put in a take this guy, get, and we'll do a plus. And I'm just going to go with 5. So we've got replicated variable, and we've set it so that whenever I hit the key, we're going to change the contents of this replicated variable. So if we come over to our solution, I'm just going to move this off and fire this up. We have a character. Oops. Let's just go change this little text thing a little bit. I really don't need it. So I'm going to set this to 0. By setting this to 0 on a tick event, it just means it's going to see 1, and then it's just going to print it once, and then it's going to destroy it. So that should make that look a little bit better. So in the up corner, you can see replicated, and if I hit 1, it's increasing the replication variable, which is what we would expect, but it's really not replicating. And we can see that if we were to go, so if I come to this little ellipse here, I'm going to open this up, number of players, I'm going to set that to 2, and then instead of play standalone, I'm going to set this, you can either set this to players listening server, so what it'll do is it'll open up the listening server and open up a client, or you can say is players client, where it'll open up 2 clients, the main screen will be client 1, and client 2 will be in a sub screen. So I'm just going to go fire this up. And of course, it's going to open it off screen. So as you can see here, we've got 2 clients. And if I hit 1, as you can see, it's not replicating. So as you can see in the upper corner, it says client 2, 30, client 2, replicated to 0. So there's 2 client 2s there because there's 2 characters in client 1, and there's 2 clients in client 2, and then there's 2 characters in the server, and I'm only controlling 1, but as you can see, it's not replicating from client 2 to client 1 or going through the server, and that's an issue. So just because you set a variable to replicated doesn't mean it's actually going to replicate. So the way that replication works is that we actually have to send a value to the server, and replication then goes from the server back out to the clients. So we have to create this kind of a looping effect. So to do that, we need a server function so that we can send a value to it, and then from there it will then replicate out to the clients. So let's go ahead and do that. So if I come back out here, and we're just going to go grab this, and we're just going to dislocate this. So select no, break that link. I'm just going to open this up. So to create server functions, we just have to right click, and then we're going to say custom event. So we're going to add a custom event, and I'm just going to call this and there's a lot of different ways to do it. Some people like to put a underscore there. Some people will just keep it all as one word. But usually they like, we like to put server. That way we know that this is a server function or a server event. And then once it's compiled and saved, we can come over to the details once this is selected, and you can see there's not replicates, multicast, run on server, and run on owning client. We're going to set this as an event to execute on the server. So now this is what we refer to as a server function. So the idea is that the client calls this, and if there's an input that's going in, right, it will send that input to the server, and then so that the server can then consume it. And so when it comes to replication, we want to send data to the server, and then we can then use this replicated variable to update, what we want to update on the server. So from here, I'm just going to go ahead and call this, and you can send parameters through. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to call it update value, click on there again, and go to float. And I'm just going to go and put that right into there. So what it's going to do is it's going to take that value and add that to the existing replicated value that is currently sitting on the server. And then that replicated value is then going to go back. It's going to set set that, and then that should then replicate back out to the clients. So from here, I can then call on this debug key. We're just going to say server update float, and I'm just going to pass in a value. I'm going to put in a 5, and so that's the value that I'm just going to be updating. So there it is. So this will go out to the server, and since this is now set to replicate, this will then replicate back up to the clients. So Let's compile that, make sure it's saved. And I'm just going to go ahead and just move that there. Move that off screen. And so now if we fire this up, and we see we've got replicated, if I hit the 1 key, as you can see on client 2, it's replicated to client 1, and it's also updated on the server. So, and as I keep incrementing it, it's going to keep incrementing. Again, client, there's the ones that are zeros. That's the other. That's actually the other client with a different character, and we're not updating their values. We're only updating ours. So it's the autonomous proxy, which is us. It's updating us. And it's updating the replicated value. So what's happening is we're sending it to the server, and then that value is then coming back out to the client, back to us again. So it's updating us. So it's updating on the server. It's updating on client number 1 because we're on client number 2, and it's also updating back on client 2. But it's actually going in a roundabout way to do that update. It's not maybe the most efficient way if you're planning on then using that value, right? So, and this kind of then goes into what we can then do with the replicated conditions. So if I was to go owner only, right, and you can play with these once you get this. So we're going to go only. So this is only going to replicate back out to the owner. So with this, if I fire it up, right, what's going to happen is that I'm going to send it, and as you can see, it replicates back out to me, but doesn't get replicated to client 1. So it'll go to the server, it'll update the server, and then it will update, and then that will get replicated back out to the client. If I do it again, it'll just keep going. So again, we're skipping. This can be very useful if this is something that you need to update on the server, and then maybe update as a validation check back on your client. And then if we were to go to skip owner, right, and this can be useful for kind of like the reverse, where you may be updating that value yourself on your client, but then you need to also replicate that back to the server, and then the server can then update the clients. So again, to do that, we're going to fire this up, and if I hit the 1 key, as you can see, it's updating on client 1 on the server, but it's not updating on client 2, which is what I'm now currently controlling. So again, this can be useful if you need to kind of optimize how and where you want variables to replicate between the client and the server. You can do it that way using some of those conditions. All right, so that's basic replication. And again, that's a variable that is over here in replicates, right? But we also have this, and again, this is useful if you want to replicate variables that are going to be used within a tick event. And that could be in a tick event on the actor, a tick event in a component on the actor, it could be on the fizz tick of the actor, wherever you need it to replicate. This is usually the best way to kind of do it, just using regular variable replication. But if you needed a state replicate, then you want to use rep notify. And so what we've done here is we've created this rep notify, and I'm just going to set this to none. Set it back. So what happens here is that, again, on a rep notify, and so I'm going to create a debug key for that. And I'm going to set it to debug key 2. So rep notify works very similar to replicated variable, but it also has an event trigger. So let's go ahead and create a new server function. So we're going to add a custom event. So I'm going to call it update float state. And again, we're going to add a variable. So this is a variable that will be sent across the network to the server. So I'm going to set that to server. And then if I drag this guy off and I say set, you're going to notice that there's something slightly different here. It says set with notify. And so when we created this rep notify, it actually created a function called onRep_replication state notify. So it's kind of Unreal Engine's nomenclature, so you can kind of tell the difference between a regular function and a replication notify function. For all intents and purposes, it's just a function, but it's a function that has been automatically assigned to an event dispatcher on this variable, so that when this guy gets triggered, it will then execute the function on the that has been associated with this with a variable change. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and connect this. And for this one, I'm just going to go ahead and do the update there. And we're just going to just update the value. And then in order for us to actually output this, what we're going to do is we're going to come over to here. And then from here, I'm just going to go. I'm going to do a print text so we can get some formatting. I'm going to drag this off. So there's our format text. I'm just going to put a value there, and I'm just going to go grab this, and we'll do a get on there. So if I want to then, again, so what's going to happen is it's going to go onto the server. The server is going to execute that value, right? But then it's going to trigger this function call where it can then be used. So if we now kind of go back to our solution, and this is on key 2, we should see some text changes on our character. So if I hit the key, it should be working. Why isn't this replicate? Oh, yeah. Help if I hooked it up. So, yep. So there's our key. Help if I hook that up. Float state. And we're just going to go ahead and we'll just do a flat 50. All right, so let's try that again. This time with it hooked into the key. So if I hit 2, as you can see, there it is, client state. Now if I hit the key again, server update, the server is updating, but the clients aren't updating. So, and that is actually by design. So if we stop it and start it again and do the first one again, so we hit 2. As you can see, both the clients and the server updated on the notify. But if I hit it again, it's only updating the server because we're sending to the server is acting it, and it's going to execute the function to update the value. But the way that Unreal Engine works is that if the value has not changed, it will not replicate that value back out to the clients. So it will only ever replicate, and it's the same for regular values as well. It's not going to replicate. It doesn't want to waste network bandwidth by sending out a value that is that has already been sent out. Right, so unless that value is getting consumed and changed, and to do that, you'd probably want to do it in a very different way. If you're just sending out values to be updated, it's going to go out, it's going to update. But if you try and send the same value out again, it's like that value, since the value has not changed on the server, it doesn't see any need to change it on the client. So that's a good thing. But again, the conditions also work for this as well. So if we say we go to skip owner, right, we'll do a notify on the server and the client, but it won't come back to us. So again, I'm just going to fire this up and just kind of show this real quick. And let's just fire that off. Again, client 1, we're on client 2. We went out to client 1 and went out to the server, but it didn't get replicated to client 2 because we're skipping the owning client. We told it to skip the owning client. And again, it would work the same way on the other one. Okay, so that's going to do it for blueprints. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to switch over to C++. So when we created this solution, because it's a C++ solution, we went ahead and created a nice little editor for us. So what I'm going to then do is let's go ahead and switch over to the C++, and we can then go ahead and kind of set up the same things as we see here in C++ and show how you can set that up. So you can set it, and what you need to do in your C++ classes to do that. Okay, so for the C++ part of this video, let's go to the content drawer and let's go to C++ classes. And I'm going to, let's see. Just click on, I'm going to click on the rep primer live. It's my project. Right click, go to new class, and I'm just going to take an actor component. So I could choose to go ahead and do this in the character, but there's already a lot of stuff in there, and just so that we can strip out all the things that are not relevant and only focus on the things, the replication things that are relevant to this video. Let's just go ahead and create an actor component. And we're going to go hit next. I'm going to go public, so I get a nice little public folder, a public and private folder for all of that stuff. And I'm going to call this demo. I'm going to call this just a demo replication component. And let's go ahead and hit create class. And then Unreal Engine is going to go ahead and do its thing, creating us a component. I'm just going to go ahead and reload that. And I've got live coding on. I'm not a big fan of it, so I will be turning this off after it's finished its first compile. Reason why I don't like it is because it just does a patch build, where I would much prefer to have complete compiles. And then I'm just going to run it again. Should go a lot faster since there's no changes. All right. So once we create this, we'll get a basic component like this. And now we could go ahead and let's go ahead and reproduce what we created in the character blueprint. We'll kind of recreate those two states here. Okay. Okay, so before we get started, I'm actually going to create a custom struct, and I'm just going to add it into this component. And the reason why I want to do this is because when it comes to replication, we can replicate, you can replicate primitives, you can replicate classes as well as structs. Usually if you're working within Unreal Engine, primitives and structs are usually the best way to do it. If you do need to replicate a class, then you want to make sure that you're not using you want to create an actual class and not an Unreal Engine class. And that's purely because at that point that class is going to be going up and down the network. Structs can go up and down the network, and that's because these structs are not managed by Unreal Engine's garbage collector, but any classes that derive off UObject are being managed by Unreal Engine, and so we don't necessarily want to send those up and down the network. So usually good practice is if you do want to send a data structure, use a struct. If you have to use a class, then you'll probably want to create a real class, not an Unreal Engine class. The old-fashioned C++ classes, and do it that way, because those classes will not be managed by Unreal Engine. but you can do that as well. So I'm going to create a struct because I want to kind of show we're going to do something with both a struct and a primitive as we kind of continue to kind of build out in here. All right, so when creating variables, there's a couple of ways we can do this. So Unreal Engine, when it supports variables, and I'm just going to bring all of these over and we can talk about them. So again, when I say primitive, that's anything between an integer, a character, right, a float, a double, a bool. Those are primitives, so they can all be replicated. And when you want to replicate in Unreal Engine, you're going to want to put it on replicated. Another good practice is that if you are using replicated variables, you want to make them transient and not blueprintable. And that's really because these are variables that are going to be they're data transmission. And they should really be used for data transmission. And if they are going to be consumed, you don't want anything to be altering them outside of that network transmission loop, right? They should be control. Something should come in, they should be set, and then they should be replicated out. And if they are being consumed on the replicated out, that's good. So that's why we're going to keep these as transients, and we're not going to make them blueprintable. So something else, as you can see here, so this is just for basic replication. If you want to do, so you can do a primitive, you can do structs. So that's why I created this struct up here. Again, it's blueprintable, but this is again transient. And it's replicated. You can do arrays, and you can do arrays of primitives, arrays of structures as well, and you can replicate those, and they will replicate. When doing a rep notify, instead of using replicate, you'll just use replicated using, and then you have to put an equals, and then this is the function that is going to be tied to this variable, right? So again, this is when it creates the notification dispatcher of this variable when it's changed. This is the function that we want to run. So we'll add those functions in just a bit. And then again, like I said, you can do. I'm just going to do the same thing for a structure change here. For the most part, this is what you can replicate. You can't replicate sets and you can't replicate maps. Unreal Engine does not like that at all. So, but you can do arrays, you can do structs, and you can do primitives. All right, so now that we've got our variables and we've set the replicated, let's go ahead and get those functions in so we can satisfy the squigglies. And to do that, I'm just going to come down here underneath. And so whenever you're using a function here, you want to make sure you've got the function tag, the function macro right up here. So just make sure that that's there. And then that will set it. And if I compile again, eventually those purples will go away. And now we've got these two functions. So once you've got these two functions, you can come in and you can define what those functions are going to do. And we'll take care of that. Let's just do that right now. Let's see. I'm just going to take a look. While I'm here, let's just go ahead and blow this up a little bit. Make this a little bit bigger for you guys. So there's our struct. It's just got a name and a value. And there is our structs here, and these are the two functions we need to go ahead and create. So I'm just going to go ahead and fix those. And yep. So these are our. So whenever these get, whenever those variables get changed on a notify, these are the functions. And again, you can name these whatever you want in C++. As long as the name here is this, as long as the name here matches whatever this function is. But again, since Unreal Engine in the blueprints likes to use an onRep underscore, we're going to just go with the same name convention, kind of keep things the same. It's just Unreal Engine convention that we're dealing with. All right, so within here, let's see, on rep change. Actually, before we do this, there's a couple of, let's get a couple of little support functions in. I have a couple of little support functions. That way we can print these things out, and it'll be a little bit easier. So I'm just going to bring these over. So here I've got error message, which is my standard, which is takes in a string, a color, and the seconds for duration. But I'm also going to include this print tick message as well. So let's go ahead and add these in real quick. So for error message, since it didn't do that, I'm just going to go fix this real quick for my other one. Make sure that's there. So all I'm going to do here, since I'm not going to turn debugging on or off. You see that I do that in some of my others, but for this one, this is just a primer. Just going to use if the game engine's there, go ahead and run the add-on screen debug message, and then there's our message, there's our color, and there's our second or duration. And then on print, we're gonna use this one to determine what we're going to print as far as the message. So this is going to be just the value coming in. So on print tick, for this demo, I'm also going to include this thing called get owner role. So because this is a component, this is get owner role. If you were to do this in an actor, you just run get role. And the roles, there's only really three roles. It's either going to be an authority, an autonomous proxy, and a simulated proxy. Okay, and this actually kind of goes back into when we're working with those conditions in the blueprints, right? We were able to determine certain things are on the server, certain things are going to be on my client, and some things could be on the other client. So the way this works is, so authority, this is the server. Okay, so this is what's going to happen on the server. The autonomous proxy, this is your client. This is the player's client, right? This is the player's client. And then the simulated proxy. So this is the representation of the character, I should say, on the player's client. The simulated proxy is the representation of an AI or another player. If it's a PvP game, right? That would be considered a simulated proxy. So what's happening is that we're all sending our data to the servers, and then the server is replicating that back out to the clients. As far as I'm concerned, I get to control my character on my client, right, through the server. And so all the other clients, as well as any other AIs, they're considered simulated proxies, where mine actually is the autonomous because I'm controlling it. And then on another client, my character would be considered simulated because the server is simulating that movement that is being sent via me to the server back. So it gets a little bit crazy, but that's kind of what these three roles are. So you've got your authority, autonomous, and simulated. Right, and we're going to we'll play with this and see this. So I've got different colors. So we'll be seeing reds, emeralds, and magentas. So if it's a magenta, it's considered simulated. If it's emerald, it's considered me, the player. And if it's red, it will be considered that this is the value on the server. All right, and then under struct change, I'm only going to we'll implement both. Why not? So here it is, listing server, autonomous proxy, simulated proxy. So again, I'm just going to use these. This can be very useful if you're kind of if you need to do some debugging to determine is it being replicated or where is it being replicated, and is it being replicated to where I think values are being replicated to. So but you could also use these as conditions when it comes to execution, right? If you've got a value coming in on here, we may want to update the value, but we might not want to execute something. So this could be like a value that's going to trigger, that could also trigger, say, an effect, right? Well, we don't need effects playing on the server. Okay, it's only we only need them on the client, but we may want to update the value to say that, the weather has changed or something has changed. So the server gets updated, it replicates out, but it's not going to execute certain code. That will only ever get executed on these two. So you could use this as a way of filtering things out on the get role or owner role if you're using it within a component. And so that's kind of what we've got here. And again, this can be done on the tick. This could be also done here on struct change as well. So here, all we're going to do is once this gets triggered, it'll fire. So we'll know it's being fired. And I'll just add it in here too, if we get to play with the arrays. All right, so that's just there to help us, to let us know when that's going to change. And then let me just update the tick real quick. So again, we got our replicated struct value. If if we send anything to the array, we want to figure out, for each element in the array, we want to show which one's changed. The thing about an array is that just like values, like structures and replicated primitives, if nothing is changed in either value within the struct, it won't replicate the struct. But if you replicate just one value, what it's going to do is it's going to do a serialize, and that's if the serialization string changes, right? Which means something in there has changed. It doesn't need to know which value has changed. It's only looking to determine based on the, so what it'll do is it'll serialize it down into an archive, into a, into data, into a kind of a binary string. And then if that binary string is different from the other binary, and then the cached binary string, then it says, okay, there's a change. And then it will trigger the change. It will trigger replication. And it's the same thing for the array. It will literally serialize the entire array and keep that array element. So if one element in that array, one item, and that could be a structural item, not just an integer, in there, if one of those has changed, it will then trigger it. Otherwise, if nothing's changed, it won't replicate. And then again, so then we've got structure change here, and this is replicated state change. So again, we'll print these values out, as well as print out any messages if that trigger changes. All right, so now what we've got our variables, which are transient and internal, and set to either replicated or replicated using. We've got some little utility functions there. We've got our notification functions here. We set up our component tick. So just like with the blueprint, in order for us to trigger these variables and update these variables, we need to have some server functions. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. And I'm just going to bring them, just put them there. So there's a couple of things we can do. So kind of like with Unreal Engine, there's server reliable, and with validation. So if I was to bring up let me go find that real quick. So when we create these server functions, actually this is my demo. When we create this, we have run on server, then we have the reliable, right? It's usually a good idea to click on reliable to make sure that this is a reliable function. So server reliable, and so that's kind of our function here, and I've got it for all of my server functions here and here and here. So if I just move this back, that kind of lines up to when we create a server function, again, you can name this whatever you want here anyway, but if you want, for naming purposes, you could do server, you could do underscore as well. Undo that. So you could do a server underscore update value, or you could just keep it all in one. I'm just going to keep it all in one. It's up to you. But in order to make this a server function, you're going to want to use server keyword here in the function. And then you've got reliable, which will make it server reliable. And then if you wanted to, which is something that you don't have access to in the Unreal Engine blueprints, but you do here, is with validation. So with validation allows you to validate the input coming in first if you need to do a validation check before it actually gets used, before it actually gets used. And so we'll play around with this and show you how that kind of works. So I've got this on this function up here. Everything else is just going to be server reliable without validation. And that's only because when we go ahead and do the implementation, we need to do it. I'm going to have to add an extra function. So, but again, you can do validate with validation for anything you feel that you need to have validation on, or you need to do a validation check on. And that can be very useful, especially if you've got like PvP games where you're kind of sending damage, right, from a player to a server, and you want to register it, right, and you want to say that only certain things do certain amounts of damage. That way, if anyone was to try and mod the client to send more damage, well, when it hits the server and you do a server validate, you can then capture that on the with validation. So let's go ahead and set that up real quick. So let me just go over here and all right. I'll just grab this one at a time. So, under begin play, I'm just gonna tell you what, let's just close that and close that and close that, close that, close that. Close that for now. Okie dokie. So when you do this, when you create this, right, it's not as simple as, you know, just getting rid of the squigglies, because these are special functions. We have to label them a certain way. So here we have the name of the function, which is the same as the name up here. But then if it's with validation, we have to put an underscore validate after that for the validated function, and then we have an implementation on the server. So this is the implementation of that server function definition that is over here, and this is the validation of this server function validation. And so within here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, take this value, check to see if this value is between 0 and 100. If it is between 0 and 100, right, then return true. Otherwise, if it's less than 0 or it's more than 100, return false. And if this thing returns false, then well, first off, we're going to put an error message saying server validation failed, but this could be where you might want to record this or try and catch people which are trying to hack your servers. You know, it all depends on how you want to, on what you want to do to set it up. Again, we're just using a simple value. You're probably going to want to take, check account information and stuff like that if that's what you're going to be using it for. But again, this is here to validate that this value is true and within the tolerance. If it's within tolerance, it's good. If it's outside of the tolerance, return false. And by returning false, it will not even try to execute this function here. And at the very least anyway, it won't execute this. I'm going to put a clamp here. It's always just good practice that you should, any input coming in, you should clamp it. You should clamp it on the client before it's being sent. But again, it's just good to clamp it again on the server as well, just to double check. Since the server is technically, this is the authority, right, for your game. All right, so that's a function with validate. That's server function with validation. So the others don't have validation, so we'll just go ahead and just bring those over. All right, so here again, I'm just going to take, if there's no validation and it's just server, you just need the implementation. You don't need to worry about the validation. So again, this is update struct, this is update struct array. On this one, I'm just going to put an integer in as a unique. That way, if it's the same value, we're not going to keep appending to this array. So that's what this does. And then here, this is just a struct. So if I pass the struct in by value, we'll just replace the struct. Alrighty. So those are the functions. So now we need a way to access these functions. So what I've done is I've actually made these functions, again, they're protected, they're within the class. So now I just need some public functions to manipulate them. So to do that, I'm just going to come and I'm going to go ahead and add this. So we have update value, update struct, update integer, and update structure notify. So I'm just going to go potential fixes. So these ones I can do a potential fix on since they work as regular functions. All right. And one more thing before we get started. As you can see here, there's a lot of red here, and that is because these are network functions, so I need to include the Unreal Engine network.h file. All right, so we've labeled those. Let's just go ahead and fill out these functions here, finish this off, and then we'll try and do a compile. So update value, if I call this, so this is the component, this is the public facing function. It's just going to take a value in and it's going to call the server function. And you might, rather than, sometimes it's just good not to call a server function directly within a component, because there may be some things, so you may want to wash the value before you send it to the server, as well as do some additional checks. Again, anything that's going over the network, you want to validate it. You might want to do a validation just to make sure before you send it. There's no point in sending any unnecessary network traffic. And let's just do that as well. All right, so we've got all that. I've got this. So let's go ahead and build. And if I've done everything right, yep, good. So as you can see here, we've got an error message, and I kind of wanted to do this because there's an additional thing that we need to add. So if you, and you'll only ever see this error down here. I don't know if I can blow this up or not, but as you can see here, there's an unresolved external public void, and it's going to say get lifetime replication props class, right? If you see this, it's because the way Unreal Engine works is that there's this generate body, right? And what it's going to do is it's going to, as part of it, it's going to see that there are these properties with replicated or replicated using on there. And as soon as it sees that, it's going to say, this is a object or a class that can replicate. And because of that, it needs an additional function in order for you to, and so it will actually generate that function, which is really great, but it also, we need to have that same thing in the implementation, which it doesn't generate. So we need to capture that. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So I happen to have one already, which is already set up. so you can kind of find this. It's, you know, you can go into the documentation, and usually they've got one that you can copy and paste. So in usual, you'll see a example of replicating property, and then it'll have something like this: do rep lifetime. So the way that this is going to work is that once this is here, right, what you need to do in here is you've got some do rep lifetime macros. So you need to have a pointer to, and this macro function, right, points to, you need to have this pointer so it knows which object to run the Unreal Network code on. And this, if you see a red squiggly or a green under this, check to make sure, again, you've got this header, because this macro is defined in this include here. And this is the value on this object which we want to attach which we want to monitor for network replication. Okay, and so this kind of lines up to, let me see if I can find my blueprints real quick. All right, so as you can see here, I've got my replicated health variable, right? And this is the replicated here. So as soon as we've got the tag on there, but as you can see here, this is the actual macro, and we've got replicated. Now, as you can see here, we have replication condition. If we want to add the condition, then you're going to want to use the do replicate lifetime condition, and that's the condition here. And as you can see, it takes in a bunch of them. So here's our enumerator. If you want to see all of the actual enumerations, I'm just going to go ahead and go to definition real quick. So under core net types, there's this enumerator, and this is the actual enumerator. So you can see this is the same enumerator that is actually being used in this drop-down list here. So whatever you need here should match up to whatever this enumerator is here, as you can see. Shouldn't really use those. So you can see we've got owner, skip owner, simulation, automation. Okay, and if you need a definition, there's a definition right there as well. All right, so we can get to this when we look at the net struct. And there are a lot of other of these macros. So if I say do replicate, there's this. I'm not going to get into these, but there's a lot of other ones you can use again for network optimization. Again, this is where you can start getting into this. But you've got do lifetime active override, active override. So the difference between override and override fast, or any of these fasts, is that usually there's a check that is happening on the replication. But if you don't want the check to happen, because that could, again, cause cycles, you might want to use fast, where it will just replicate it without any checks. So that's usually what happens when you see a fast. It's safe without fast. It's not safe with fast. And again, that could be if it's a value which you don't need to worry about any kind of checks or anything. You just want it to replicate and go out as quickly as possible. You might want to use fast. But if you need to double check to make sure that that is a valid replication, then you might want to just use the regular. But you can do it with parameters. You've got conditions, which is the same as what we see, and then you've got the regular, which is condition none. So again, you've got some additional things here which you can use. I'm just gonna remove that. And so once we have this, we've got the nets, we've got the notifiers. Right now I'm going to do we'll do this on replicated struct with set to none. But if we've got some time, we can just undo this and set this to condition skip owner, if you wanted to skip the owner or skip the skip owner, or you want to skip the what is it, owner only, or skip owner. Yeah. So if you want to play with these are all the flags you could play with by running condition. And again, it's under core net types. .h. All right, so now we've got all that done, let's see if we can build this, and that error message should go away. All right, and it's gone away, and I've got a good compile chime. So now that we've got this little component with replication turned on, we should be able to go back to the blueprints in our project and add that in, and we should be able to play with those replicated functions. Okay, so now we're back in the our character blueprints. I'm just going to go say add class, or add component, I should say. So I'm going to come up here and find our demo component, which has got our replicated values in there. I'm going to hit compile. I'm also going to set component replicates to true. So we've got that. So now we can pull our replicated component over, and within here we should have our functions. Actually, yep. So we don't have access to our server functions because they're protected. So that's why we have, but we've got these wrapper functions. So this is our update value. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another function. We're going to update this value, and then we should start seeing that show up in our character when we run in the project. So I'm going to set this to key let's put this on debug key 6. All right, I'm going to put this on debug key 6, and we should be able to see a value, and I'm going to set the value to, so this is going to be the one which actually has the validation check. So this should be a good value. So first off, let's make sure this works, and this is what happens when we run it with validation, with a good validation. So I've got the client, we've got it up. I'm going to hit 6. So as you can see there, we've got the magenta, we've got the green values in the left-hand corner, as well as the server replicates. So as soon as I hit this, you can see green 10, magenta 10, and everything else is set to 10. And I can increment this, right? And I can actually increment this past the validation number, because again, the value that's going to the server is 10, which is within the scope. So, but you know, the value that we're incrementing is going well past, and that's perfectly fine. That's what we want. And as you can see, server, client 1, client 2, everything looks good. So now let's go ahead and make this 200. So I'm just going to go over here, set that to 200, compile, bring it back. So now this is going to be a bad validate. So as soon as I hit that, as you can see, the server did not like that, and it went ahead and actually terminated. It actually went ahead and terminated that client. So as you can see, there's client 2, but only client 1 is visible. Client 2 got ejected from the instance for failing the server validation. So that's kind of automatically built in there. So if you wanted to put some things in there to check to make sure that people are not hacking your system, you can go ahead and run that validation function. So because we were so far out of that validation tolerance, it decided to just, you know, like I said, it just terminated the client through that validation function. All right, so that is if we're validating a value. We could also do a debug and do the struct. So and I'm going to run update struct notify. So this is actually going to run our notifier, and let's put this on debug key 7. Let's set that to 55. So we're going to update the value on that struct to 55 when we press the keys. So we'll just go ahead and run this. So here we have client. We have both clients and the server up. I'm going to hit our 7 key. And as you can see, there's the simulated proxy, the autonomous proxy. They both got updated. As you can see, the values on there have been updated. So we have a green 55, a magenta 55, and a red 55 on the server. As you can see, the server has 6 zeros. That's 3 for client 1 and 3 for client 2, server representation. And as you can see, the green represents client, the simulated, and the proxy, and as you, and that's the same when it on both clients. So that's the set, and that's the notify. And again, if I hit 7 again, all we're doing is a straight update, so it won't run the notify again because the value has not changed. So if we wanted to run that notify again and again, what I can do is I can just get an int. So here we're just going to combine an int on the client and then send that value to the server. And so this will fire the notify each time because that value is changing. So we'll just do that. So as you can see, simulated proxy, automated proxy. So as you can see, now these values are replicating to the simulated and automated proxies, but as you noticed, there's no message saying that that function is being fired on the server. The value is being updated on the server, but it's not being sent to the server. So that function's being fired on both proxies, but the function's not being fired on the server, even though the value is being updated on the server, right? So with C++, it's a little different. So if you needed that thing to be fired both on the client and the server, what you might need to do is you might need to just include the function. So when we did the when we did that notification on with Blueprints, it fired it in 3 places. Here it only fired it in 2 places. So if you needed this thing fired in 3 places on the client and the server, because it's a function, right, you could just update the value in the server function and then execute it from the server function as well. So so you have some options there. So just something to be aware of, and that's why sometimes it's good especially within the notifies, to put the get role authority so you can find out where it's actually being fired. So it's like I said, we updated it, but it only replicated the notification to the clients, unlike the blueprint, which replicated it to all 3. But like I said, you can get around that by just taking that function there, if you need it to replicate on the function on here as well. So this is the notify. Yeah. So you could also call it, so if I do it here, it'll and we rebuild and rerun that function, we'll see it in all 3 places. So now if I run it, I'm just going to go grab client number 2. So as you can see now, it's on both there and the listening server. So just little differences. Again, it's automation and optimization. There's some things to think about or to watch out for. So now as you can see, because there's a check, it's running on the server all the time, but the value is not changing. But when it goes into the replicated, it's not getting replicated out. So just little things to be aware of. But again, everything you can do in Blueprints, you can do in C++. But then in C++, there's some optimizations in there that can be very useful as well, that are not necessarily there for the Blueprints. All right, so I think that I'm going to wrap this video up. If you like what I'm doing, feel free to like and share my videos, as well as subscribe to my channel. I greatly appreciate that. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I always enjoy reading those. And yeah, I will catch you in the next video. Cheers and have a great day.